Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm obviously going to be talking about error handling, but first, I will introduce myself. I'm Sasha Solomon. I'm a software engineer at Twitter, and I used to work at Medium. So last time I spoke at GraphQL Conf, I took you on a journey through how Medium migrated their architecture without slowing down by using GraphQL. So it's a year later, and now I work at Twitter, but I'm still working on GraphQL. And coming from taking the first steps to a place where GraphQL is in full swing is a lot different. But I'm going to talk to you about one of the things that was the same, which was error handling. So first off, let's just start like we would any good talk with a GraphQL query. Cool, so we'll query for a user, Ash, and then ask for their ID and name. Cool, so let's run that query. And we'll get something like this back. Cool, everything worked out. We got our user, and we asked for an ID and a name. We got everything. Cool. But what happens when things don't work out in GraphQL? Well, right now, what happens is it comes back in this errors array. Errors by default are propagated in the errors array. And you'll see this on like a normal GraphQL response. So you get back an error, it ends up in the errors array. If you've started using GraphQL, this is like the first thing you'll see. Like you start messing something up and you're like, ah, cool, errors. So let's just like look at that. So let's run another query. We'll ask for Ash again, our user, but let's look at what happens when something goes wrong. Cool, so let's run it and cool, so yeah, so we got this like data, user is null, okay? And then we have this like whole errors thing. We have this like array, it's telling us the path, okay, it's a user, the location, so it's trying to like point you where your error came from. But when we kind of look at this, it's kind of hard to know exactly what happened. You're like, okay, like object not found, so maybe it wasn't there for some reason. But it's kind of hard to just like parse this with your brain. And it might be hard to parse this if you're like a client. So this is kind of like how we get started when we first start using GraphQL. This is like what errors look like for us. So there's maybe some problems with this. Like first off, kind of like all errors are treated the same. All errors end up in this errors array, no matter what kind of error they are. Also, this was a simple query, but more complex queries, it might be harder to kind of know where this error came from. Like maybe if it's a list of things, like a list of users, like which user was it, you kind of have to like really look at that. And also, it's kind of hard for the client to know what errors to care about. I mean, all of these errors ended up in this errors array, but maybe some of them are more important than others. Maybe there's ones we can ignore for the client. And also through all of this, the client doesn't really know what to display. We have this errors array, but we should do something. But we don't necessarily know exactly what to do. So first, before we kind of really get into this, let's just talk about what is an error. So let's like look at some of these. So things that we might consider errors are like an internal server error, maybe a deleted user, a bad gateway, unavailable in country, suspended user. These are things that we might consider errors. So first off, like when we say internal server error, I don't really think that's the same as like a suspended user. Those just don't see the same to me. They're not like the same severity. Also, maybe like bad gateway and unavailable in country. Those also don't really seem like the same kind of severity. One seems a little different than the other. So when we start thinking about errors, what are errors? We kind of come up with these like error categories. So things like internal server error, bad gateway, deleted user, unavailable in country, suspended user. We kind of can separate these into different categories. So this first category, internal server error, bad gateway, things like that. And then this other category, deleted user, unavailable in country, suspended user. So this first category, this is kind of like something went wrong. Like something obviously went wrong. These isn't good. And this other category, it seems like nothing really went wrong. We asked for a user, and we got some of these other things back, but this is kind of a normal operation. So this first group, I would just call these straight up errors. They just seem like this is an error, like something bad happened, something went wrong. But the second group, these aren't really errors, right? I mean, nothing went wrong. I would almost just call these results. They're not like the results that we were necessarily like expecting. There may be alternative results, but they're results nonetheless. Cool. So let's like walk through why. Why is this the case? So to kind of reiterate this, let's just go through like what happens when we get like an error, what we think of as an error. So cool, we have our really fancy web client here. We're going to make a query to the GraphQL endpoint, obviously, to our GraphQL gateway or maybe our GraphQL server, and that'll probably make a request to one of our microservices or our backend. But let's say that is just not doing well right now. Like we deployed into something awful, it's on fire, and it sends something back, probably like 500, and then that comes back to our web client and probably sends something in this errors array, right? So what is our client going to display? Probably something like 500. Yeah, so it'll like throw an exception, and the client will try to display that. So when we think about that, we have these error categories. I would say these errors are really, we couldn't get the requested data. We didn't get the data that we requested. We wanted a user, we wanted to display this web page of like fancy users, and we couldn't get that. Something went wrong. And the client should be able to like act accordingly and display a 500. But that'll kind of, you always have to like handle errors like this. Okay, so let's go through the results, things that are calling alternative results, these results. So let's do the same. Let's like walk through this again. So first we have our fancy web client again, and we'll make a request like we did before to the /GraphQL endpoint. It hits our GraphQL server, and okay, now it's going to hit our microservice or our backend, and we're going to get something back. So maybe like a suspended user or not available in country or I don't know, whatever. We'll get something back, and that's going to send back probably like suspended user from our GraphQL server. Or unavailable in country. These are the kind of things that we would want to get back. So then our client can display like, oh no, like we don't know what to do with that, or this isn't available in your country, or I don't know, we'll display something different. So in this sense, these error categories for results, I would say these results are, we did get our requested data. We asked for a user, and we're getting some sort of state of a user back. But it's not necessarily what we suspected or expected, but we are getting like a result back. So, hold up. I know I just said a lot. You're saying like I asked for a user, but I didn't get a user back. How is that the requested data? And fair. That's a fair question. So let me explain it even more. Let's dive into it. We requested a user, yes. But don't we care about all these other states? Aren't these really all just different forms of a user? A suspended user, a deleted user, a blocked user. These are all really users. They're just kind of different users. And so shouldn't we be able to query for these if we actually care about them? And if we've learned anything in GraphQL, if I've learned anything at all, it's you get to ask for what you care about. The whole thing with GraphQL is the clients get to ask for the data that they need, the data that they want, the data that they care about. So let's look at how we might model this in our schema. And who doesn't love union types? I do. I love union types. I will sing their praises. Okay, so let's get into it. So we have a user. Cool. And then now let's maybe say we have all of these other different states of a user. So we have deleted is blocked, suspended. So maybe when we're making our schema here, we can kind of say, okay, we have a user, and then we have all these other sort of forms of a user. So really, this is like a user result. Again, these are all results, right? Like these are just different results. So really, we have a user result, and that is a user or a deleted user, or they're blocked, or they're suspended. So these are all different states of user, and these all happen within like the normal operation of your app. Cool. So if we do something like this is also kind of cool because now we could have something that's like, okay, we have a user and we have all the normal fields on the user. But then maybe for deleted, we can say, actually, maybe we want to like pass along a message, like why were they deleted? Like what happened? Or I don't know. For is blocked, we could give a reason why they were blocked. And for suspended, maybe we can add in a policy violation link or something. These are kind of things that might be useful to know. If you don't get a user back, well, why couldn't I get them back? And what are some things associated with that? Cool. So let's look at what this looks like in the GraphQL SDL, our schema definition language. So you've probably seen some of this before, but let's look at it. So okay, we have our user. It's really simple. There's probably other fields on it. And then we can define all of these other different error types, these like result types. So we have like suspended, has a reason. We can probably have is blocked with a message, and then maybe we can also have like blocked by user, like we can figure out who actually blocked them or something. And then maybe unavailable in country, that might not be related to a user, maybe it is, but we can have like a country code and a message. Cool. And so now we have all these result types. So now we can have our fancy union, which is a user result. So it's a user or the reason we can't get one normally. And that is user or is blocked or suspended. And we can just keep adding ors for all the different result types we could possibly have for a user, all these different states. Cool. So now we've defined everything in our SDL. So let's try to make a GraphQL query. Cool. So now how we're going to query this is we're going to ask for, it's a user result. We're going to pass in our username, Ash. And now we're going to query for a user. And if you haven't seen this syntax before, this is like a spread for unions in GraphQL. So we have that ... and we're saying on a user, we want these fields. But maybe we want to look for if they're blocked or suspended. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to ask for actually on a blocked user, ask for the message and who were they blocked by, and get their username. And if they were suspended, then for the reason why they were suspended. And if you notice up at the top, we're also asking for type name. This is so we can actually know what the type of the thing is that we got back. This is GraphQL's way of doing that. Cool. So let's make this query. And this is the result we got back. We got a user, so we can see we have our user result, and it happens to be a user, and it has an ID and the name Ash Ketchum. So we got our user back. Cool. So okay, that's awesome. But we're talking about errors and results here. So let's make another GraphQL query, the same query. But let's see what happens if maybe we don't get the user back, if they're in a different state, if something different happened. So again, make the same query. And then we get back maybe something like this. So now we have still a user result, but as we can see, the type name is blocked. So that means that someone blocked this person. And then the message is user blocked Ash. Cool. We probably could have a more useful message there, but that's what we have. And then we have the other field that we asked for, blocked by user, and it looks like Brock is blocked Ash. He doesn't want to hear from Ash anymore. He's tired of it. So we can kind of see that we were able to ask for the user and then other user states. Cool. So lastly, let's just make this query one more time. But what happens when we get this, like the errors back, the unexpected errors? Hopefully, we'll get back the same thing we got before, because what we're trying to do is model like our actual user states. We're trying to model those different states we can have, and errors are unexpected. So, I mean, what we're going to get back is also unexpected. We can't really model that in the schema because we don't know what's going to come back. So we'll still get this errors array back. There's probably something you can do, to make this nicer, but that's not what this is about. So unexpected errors still end up here, as they should. Cool. So what changed now? What's good about this? So for one thing, results are customizable for each entity. So a user will have different alternative results than other fields will. And we can add different errors and customized fields for each type. So like we were able to add like message and reason, but for like blocked user, we were able to add another field that was for the actual user that blocked them. So that was kind of cool. The other thing is we know exactly where that error came from. It's pretty clear now. Before it was in the errors array, we're like, I don't know where it is. It's somewhere in there. I don't feel like digging for it, or the client has to handle it. Now it's like pretty obvious where that error came from. It was like associated with that user because we actually had to query for it. So we're really very explicit about where the error came from. And then also the client gets to decide what errors it cares about and what errors it can ignore. So as you saw there, we queried for the full union of all the possible user states we had, but maybe we don't care if someone was suspended. We just don't care if they were. We'll display it anyway. We don't have to query for that. We can remove that from our query when we're querying for that union. Neat. So this is really cool. But what about a more complex system? So what can we do with this? What happens when our schema structure is more complex? Can we put all of these union types in there? Well, let's take a look. So we have what we had before. We have our user, or the reason we can't get one normally. That's our sweet union user result. And then we have this code that we had before in our SDL. So let's add some new stuff. So let's add, maybe, since we were talking about images earlier, let's just add a profile image. So maybe that has like an ID, and then like the value is actually going to be the profile image. And then maybe there's some other things that can happen for a profile image. So like maybe you can flag an image as like not safe or something, and have a reason. And then maybe also it's hidden. Maybe you don't want to display your image to someone, so you can set hidden, and then maybe there's a message for why. So these are kind of different states of a profile image now. So let's look at this. It's our same union as we had before. It's an image now, or a reason we can't get one normally. And again, we have our image, or this image is flagged, or it's hidden. And of course, we have to kind of update our user here. Again, probably more fields on this, but let's add our profile image result, and it's of type image result. Cool. So what did we do here? We added an additional result types for our new object type. So we can keep adding different result types for different types that we have in our schema. So let's make a GraphQL query. Cool. So this is really, well, it's tiny over there, but it's kind of big here. Maybe you can see it. If you can't see it, we'll zoom in a little bit. So this is the new thing that we added. Is our profile image result. And you can see on this like big query we're making now, we're still asking for type name. We're asking for user, name, profile image result is the next thing that we're asking for. So we're still asking for a user, but we added this new field. So now we're asking for that field as well. But we're still asking for if this user is blocked or not. But we also removed is suspended. So now our big query, we have our user, the normal stuff, and now we're asking for a profile image and asking for all the different things that we could have on that as well. So flagged or hidden. Cool, so let's run it. Let's see what happens. Cool, so now we have back our data. We have our user result again, and then we have our type name, which is our user. We get Ash Ketchum, and now this time we actually have another result type in here, and it's image, and then we got the ID back. So cool, we got Ash, we got that user back, and we got the image. So the image was there, and it's displayed. And we've queried for this using our result types. So let's like make this query again, but let's say this time maybe something happens like that goes wrong with this image. So maybe we'll get one of our result types back. Cool. So now we get our user result as before. Its type is user, but therefore our profile image result, the type is flagged. And the reason is it's a copyrighted image. Ash is using a copyrighted image for his profile image. So we can see that we are still able to get our different result types back, and we're kind of able to model them all in this schema now. It's pretty neat. Cool, so let's kind of go over like what we've done with our new schema, what we've modeled. So again, like the results are customizable for each entity. So we had a user before, and then we made a new result type, which was profile image result. And it's customizable for user, image, for anything you want to add. You can add different things that you care about for the different states that you have. Again, the other cool thing is we know exactly where this result came from. We know where these things are coming from now. Any state that is associated with an image is going to be on an image, and any state that's associated with a user is going to be associated with that user. And again, the client decides what results it cares about and what results it can ignore. So if we didn't care about any of the things on a profile image, other than the profile image itself, so we don't care if it's flagged or hidden, we can just not query for that. Just don't query for it at all. So that's pretty cool. And now in this kind of new complex system, our errors don't cause failures in these nested queries. Instead of an error coming back in the errors array, and then you're like, oh gosh, like the whole thing's ruined. You can actually just decide to ignore or not the errors that the results that come back. So you can actually handle this. You're like, oh, you have, this is hidden now. We can display something different, which is what the client probably wants anyway. The other thing is we can tune how verbose we want the results to be. So we can add result types to any entity we want, like we did with profile and user image, or not. We can decide. We can make them fancier or not. So that's pretty cool. And also, maybe this is the most important part, we really more accurately represent our data. I mean, this is what we're getting back, right? This is actually what our schema should look like because this is what the data looks like coming back. So now our schema structure is able to mirror what our data actually looks like, which makes it a lot easier to reason about. It's much more intuitive now. Cool. One thing is there might be more than just 2 categories of errors. There might be more. These are just the ones that I've kind of come up with and dealt with in my time at Medium and Twitter. So there might be more than this. Maybe like rate limiting. What do you do with that? I don't know. Maybe someone else will figure that out. And the other cool thing is you can customize this as much as you want. You can do as little or as much as you want. That's the cool part of GraphQL is you can just model your schema however you want to model it. Cool. So what have we learned? We learned that not everything is an error. And you should model your errors as errors, but you should model actual results as results. So really, they're not errors at all. This whole talk has been about results. I fooled you all. Cool. So the other cool thing about this is if you're wondering, does this actually work? It does. We're actually using this functionality right now in production at Medium, but I don't work at Medium anymore. I work at Twitter. And we're working on using this functionality in the future at Twitter as well. I hope we've seen how we can approach error handling, really result handling, and how we can deal with different cases of these results, and especially how they aren't errors at all, they're results. So I hope this has been helpful for everyone. Thank you so much for listening.